The Fukushima Daiichi incident in March 2011 was a major cause for concern around the globe, with a huge number of news headlines warning people about being exposed to the radiation from the explosion. But is that radiation still there today? And is it really as dangerous as we think it is?
We'll address this in terms of Japan's radiation levels and food safety.
The primary concern for most people is the distribution of radiation levels across Japan. Which are the areas to avoid? This is a map of the radiation levels across different parts of Japan, obtained from Safecast, which is crowdsourced data. In this way, you don't have to worry about any cover-ups from the government. As we can see, radiation levels are generally lower, farther away from the incident site, and typically lie within the range of 0.08 to 0.23 microsieverts per hour. But what radiation levels are considered safe? There is no exact safe level per se, but we can compare this range to average background radiation levels across the world, and the nuclear worker safety limit, which acts as the maximum level one can be exposed to. Fortunately, the places you'll likely visit in Japan, like Tokyo, Osaka, and Hokkaido, have radiation levels lower than both of these references.
If you're wondering how nuclear worker safety limits were determined, these limits are a small fraction of the radiation level which gives no observable additional health risks. So as long as you're outside the Fukushima prefecture and the northeast of Tochigi, you're only exposed to below average radiation levels. But if you're venturing within these areas, you should reconsider, as radiation levels in certain places still exceed the nuclear worker safety limit today. The Japanese government agrees with this too, and has since set a 20-kilometer exclusion zone around the disaster site.
What about comparisons to other locations? Here's a map of Singapore for comparison, and we see that most of Japan's radiation levels are comparable or even lower than Singapore's average levels. So unless you're visiting these zones, you're not going to be exposing yourself to any more radiation than if you're staying in Singapore. So far, we've talked about radiation exposure just by being in Japan. But we know that food can be contaminated with radiation too. So how safe is the food from Japan?
Cesium-137 and 134 are radioactive substances which help to tell if a food sample is safe to eat. The existing upper limit set by the government for Cesium-137 is 100 becquerels per kilogram. Intensive sampling of Fukushima's pre-market and post-market foods indicated that the proportion of food that went above this limit dropped from 3.3% in March 2012 to 0.6% in 2014. The general takeaway is that most foodstuffs are safe for consumption.
However, those of us who would like to be on the safe side may choose to avoid boar meat, beef, venison, and mushrooms. Many samples of these food types exceeded the radioactive limits after the incident occurred, but the number of beef samples exceeding the limits had the most significant decrease since 2011, as compared to venison, boar meat, and mushrooms. This is because mushrooms are known hyperaccumulators of radiocesium, and boars feed on mushrooms. Due to the deer-specific diet as well, both boar meat and venison are more prone to accumulating radiocesium.
Now, the study also included sampling of tap water, and thankfully, tap water is found to be less contaminated. Even early after the incident and up to date, the Cesium-137 and 134 levels have not exceeded their regulatory limits.
To summarize, we've explored some concerns regarding radiation from the air, food, and water in Japan. We learned that places outside of Fukushima Prefecture and of parts of Tochigi have radiation levels comparable to, or even slightly below that, in Singapore. We also know which foods to avoid, and that water is safe for consumption. This puts us in a better position to make informed decisions about visiting Japan, and we hope that it has for you too.